Pensole is ultimately a professional development academy that features and focuses primarily on footwear, but we also added apparel and accessories this year as well, or last year. But it's really kind of the only school in the U.S. and probably the world that you can come and learn kind of the ins and outs of how to design sneakers, market sneakers, as well as giving you a pipeline into the industry, directly into the industry, primarily because we work directly with all the top sneaker brands. And so because we work with all the brands, they look to us and the students that we graduate as potential hires to get into the industry and work at the companies. And I would say in the last 7 years that we've been doing this, we have, actually 8 years, 8 years. We have over 310 students that are now employed at some of the top companies around the globe, actually. Nike is probably the biggest benefactor. They have close to 60 of our students, and I think Adidas is around 40, and New Balance is about 20 something. So it's kind of spread out across the industry, but ultimately, it's a footwear design academy that is focused on the footwear industry. It's just people know us for the sneaker part. Me getting into sneakers started from drawing baseball cards. So I was drawing like Franco Harris football cards back in the early 80s. And getting this one card, it was one of the first times that they actually showed his cleats. He specifically was wearing like these pony cleats. And when I started working on that, that was like super hard for me to draw, was the foot. And it got to the point where I just started getting like 3x5 index cards, and I was just drawing the feet the whole time, just trying to perfect drawing pony cleats. And that turned into like designing my own cleats of what I want him to wear. And then that just turned into me designing my own basketball shoes and running shoes. And I was only like 12 and 13 years old at that time. And ultimately, it came from like just this love of being challenged to create. That was a creative challenge that I could never really solve, so I just kept doing it. And then the more I got into it, the more I started learning about sneakers and falling in love with kind of the idea of having different and unique sneakers, because I was drawing them. I wish I could have made them, but ultimately I was just drawing what I felt like should have been in stores. I would say I started by just drawing stuff, so being I guess you would call an artist, where I didn't know what design was. I wasn't introduced to the word design. I was an artist. I was just drawing stuff, and it wasn't until getting into high school where I actually heard the word design for the first time, and then started to understand what that was, which changed my mindset, because up to that point I was just drawing other shoes that I saw. And then when I transferred from the artistic side of it and trying to design something, I started with a blank little 3x5 index card, and I was trying to create my stuff, my own version of stuff. And then that's when I found out what design was. And then that's when I really kind of fell more in love with the idea of creating and creativity, because it was no longer me just drawing the shoe that I saw. It was me taking the shoe that I saw. It's like, all right, how can I flip this? Can I make it a high top? Can I change this toe cap piece? So I was trying to alter what I saw instead of just repeating what I saw. And then that's what I guess design was, but I never had anybody that formally showed me how to draw or what design was. So I kind of learned a lot of it on my own, just by accident in a lot of cases. Things that I love today about the industry. I like the creative freedom that people have that don't work at big brands, because it's those small brands that are allowed to take more chances than the bigger brands. The bigger brands have access to technology and materials and processes, where the smaller brands don't have access to those things, so they have to try harder. So they usually have more innovative design lines and more innovative design thoughts, versus relying on kind of a material or a foam or technology or something like that, or airbag. Where I like the idea of creating with very little to see what you can do with very little, versus having too many things to choose from you almost sometimes don't almost reach your full creative potential if you have too many assets to pull from. So I guess I kind of like the underdog approach to it. I would say straight up design, like blank piece of paper and a pencil and see what you can do. Where, you know, I equate it to being the difference between a rapper and an MC, where, you know, I think designers need to go back to the old school way of creating, of just, you know, what could you do? What magic can you create with a blank piece of paper and a pencil and do something with that? Where I think we're losing touch of how to use our hands. The more that we embrace technology, we start to lose sight and touch of what we can do with our physical extremities that we have, which are directly connected to our brain. So it's a scientific fact that the more you use your hands, the more stimulation that your brain actually has versus pointing and clicking. You know, so there's a slight disconnection. So I think from an older form of design, it was more intuitive to who you are as a designer and as a creator. But now, you know, people are doing it in different ways. So it's kind of hard to say, you know, what is right or wrong. I think it's just whatever works best for somebody to reach their full creative potential. But for me, I like starting with absolutely nothing. And I think that's because I didn't have nothing. So I had nothing. So that's all I know is nothing. And so I've always, even though I have access to a lot now, I still have the same mindset of just starting with nothing. What can I do with that? You know, I'm the youngest of 6 kids raised by a single parent. And the majority of my mother's life, she was partially disabled. And I could never, you know, fix my mouth to make up an excuse for anything, because I saw this woman every day work magic, right? And she never complained about anything. And so for me, the work ethic has always been there, because I saw how she worked and I saw how she provided, you know, for her kids. So that always kept me grounded from the perspective of, if I want something, I got to work for it. And if I want to share what I've learned with others, I should do that, because I just saw how she was always a giver. So that part of, you know, how she raised me just became who I am, just naturally, not only just as an individual, but even professionally. You know, I just believe, man, if you're blessed with something, you should share it with other people. I think that's why you were blessed with it in the first place. Whether it's talent or knowledge or riches, you know, I just think that we are blessed with opportunities and things that we should pass on to other people, especially someone of color. You know, I wish I had a chance to meet Dwayne when I was in high school, you know, 30 something years ago. Even though it still worked out for me, but it would have been great to meet somebody that looked like me trying to do something that I want to do, where I didn't see that. I didn't have that. You know, the idols I had were my dope boys on the street, my friends who bang, and then the Lakers, because they practiced at my high school. So it was like I had these crazy, you know, I lived in this crazy world where I was in one of the worst cities in America, and then hanging out with millionaires at my high school because they practiced at my high school. And so I was able to see these two different worlds, but not everyone's going to be that athlete. And not everyone's going to, you know, I've never seen a dope dealer retire, right? So the future was these two different directions that, you know, arguably might not ever happen, and, you know, probably not a good idea that you go down that path. So I think the awareness of letting kids know that there's things that they can do outside of what they immediately see is I wish it happened more often, especially in our neighborhoods, because the same thing I grew up with is the same thing these kids are growing up with now. Whereas it's sad that it hasn't even changed that much. In 30 years, it's the same, you know, and partly it's the neighborhood's fault and the kids' fault, because they have access to the internet. They have access to things that we didn't have. They just choose not to use some of that access. But at the same time, you know, they still ain't growing up with doctors and lawyers next door. They still ain't growing up with designers and engineers next door, right? So they have a high probability of being what they see, and most of the time it ain't that good.